I wanted it to feel young. Like, I could have went out and hired a bunch of per se people who are older and a little bit more boring, but people are coming for a tasting menu that's run by a young person. And because of that, I didn't want even people who had too much like Michelin star experience, because I didn't want people who were so stuck in their ways.
You're listening to the Taste Podcast. I'm Editor-in-Chief Matt Rodbard, here with Senior Editor Anna Hezel.
Today on the show, we have Flynn McGarry, New York City chef and the subject of a new documentary, Chef Flynn. Also on the show, we have longtime New York restaurant publicist Stephen Hall. But Matt, what was it like talking to Flynn? What did you guys talk about?
Flynn McGarry is a misunderstood guy. Like, he was a boy wonder chef. He was on the cover of New York Times Magazine. Some people questioned his abilities. But let's put it to rest. This guy can fucking cook, and it's amazing. He hosted pop-ups when he was 12. He worked at Alma for 3 years. He was homeschooled. He was dedicated to the craft. Now he's opened a restaurant in New York called Gem, which received 2 stars from the New York Times and is probably one of the buzziest restaurants in the city.
Here's Matt talking to Flynn.
Flynn McGarry, welcome to the Taste Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
It's so fun to have you in. I wanted to ask you just about your age right away, because you can't deny it. But I don't want this conversation to be focused on that, because I've known you for a while, and I think your food is as good as anyone. But I had to make that statement.
It always needs to be said.
It always needs to be said, but we're not going to dwell on it.
Great.
I watched your film Chef Flynn. I think it's a cool documentary. It's coming out in theaters soon. It'll be on Hulu. But there's a scene in there where you're taking the subway in Los Angeles. You're taking the subway and you're going to Alma for your job. And this really crushed, I think will crush a lot of these perceptions that you're like, quote unquote, rich kid from like the hills of Hollywood. You're not. You're like working at a restaurant and you're taking the subway in Los Angeles.
Yeah. I mean, the subway was mostly like my mom would drive me, but I was like, why does no one take, I mean, obviously no one takes the subway in LA, but I was going to work at like during rush hour. So I was like, I lived kind of near it, and I was like, it's down. It was the perfect like thing, and it was cheap, and it was like 20 minutes. I still don't understand why people don't take the subway now, because like literally it was like it would take me 20 minutes to take the subway, or it would take me an hour and a half to drive.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I was always working, and that was always kind of what I did. And to me, though, that was also sort of a way of having a little bit more freedom, opposed to like my mom having to drive me to work.
Right.
I had sort of the ability to kind of like go by myself, especially when I couldn't drive yet.
Yeah, no, but I just wanted to be said that like you were working at Alma, like you're working there.
Yeah.
Like it's like a job. It wasn't some weird like thing for the camera.
I was working there. I worked there for almost 3 years full time, and sort of like I would stage places, but I also always had in Los Angeles. I always had like a job. Like before that, I was at this place. Raised in Stark Bar for like a year, and I was at Alma for 3 years, and I would kind of pop out every once in a while to go work at Madison Park or something, and all the chefs were very kind of supportive of that.
They were.
But always sort of when I was in Los Angeles had a full-time job.
And to be clear, how old were you when you were working at Alma?
I started when I was 14.
So you were homeschooled, right?
Yeah.
That's how you you were able to work a full-time job and do school. So you took like correspondence classes. But what was that time like at Alma? I mean, what were you learning then? Were you working the line busy Saturday night?
Yeah, I mean, Alma to me was that was like the place that I really sort of spent the most amount of time and learned not just like skills and things, but how to sort of work in a restaurant every single day. I went there and I started as the meat cook, and it was when Alma went from doing like when they got Best New Restaurant from Bon Appetit. It was like we were doing a la carte, like 150 people a night. It's a very crazy time.
Crazy busy.
And that's
place.
right when I came in there and came in as like the meat cook, and it was like that. It was really the thing where it was like got thrown into like the craziness. I had worked a little bit kind of cooking meat before that, but I mean, it was like we had like 5 different proteins on the menu for 100-something people a night, and learned how to like cook like elegant food in a very sort of fast-paced restaurant like that. And then sort of would kind of, they treated me sort of like the tournant in the restaurant. So I would kind of pop around every station, and if someone, like as any restaurant, when there's kind of high staff turnover, I was always sort of like, oh, I kind of made it a point to know all the stations, and so I would go work pastry if I had to, or sort of could hit every section. And I mean, to me, really, there learned about kind of that way of like every cook knew every station, and kind of you need to know every
classic training, brigade style training, learning different steps in the kitchen.
Yeah.
In the film, you say hype only gets you so far. I mean, you had a lot of hype around you with the New Yorker article, your first article when you were 13, I believe, and then you were on the cover of the New York Times Magazine, and then there were plenty of thoughts about that. But then hype only gets you so far. What does that mean exactly to you?
Well, I mean, I think especially in restaurants, it's like the literal thing is it gets people in the door. But then the second they're in the door, you have to actually deliver. Which I mean, that's why like hype is, I think, great for a lot of reasons. Of it brings people to you. It's also bad for a lot of reasons because they come with preconceived notions and these sort of expectations. But I mean, it's sort of like it's a thing where it's like no matter what they read, no matter how many things they're in your hands in the restaurant, and you have to deliver. And I think it's the thing where people I've had this for so long where it's like they're reading about the young kid, whatever, and they might be coming because of that, but they still need to leave satisfied and full and have eaten a meal that was delicious and had great service, and all of those things still need to happen regardless of how much or how little hype there is.
Did you learn these fundamental skills at Alma or at EMP, or is there like a time in your life when these skills all came together?
I mean, it was really like everywhere. Like, yeah. I mean, and that's the way I wanted to learn. I wanted to not just go work in one place my entire time and only learn it there. I wanted to see the ways that they cook at EMP, the ways they cook at Alma, the ways that they cook in Scandinavia, like all these different kind of ways. And then I could, from there, knowing all these different techniques and mindsets towards it, then I could figure out what my food was.
And so you really wanted to open in New York City, not in LA. And that was a conscious decision. You talk about it in the film quite a bit, and there's a little bit of a reference to pop-ups in New York, but there isn't. Gem is not open yet. So why do that to yourself? Because I feel like LA would be a slightly softer landing. You're well known there. Obviously, it's a great food city. There's so much press there, or people making the pilgrimage, and you would have had a successful career there. Why go to New York, which is like the opposite?
I mean, it's so insanely hard to have a restaurant here that I figured, like, this is the time to do that. Like, to me, the first one, I'm as has been proven very easily. I'm not one to sort of ease into things. If I want to do something, I want to fully do it. And so to me, it's sort of like I would rather have the first restaurant I have, or the first few restaurants I have, be in the hardest place to exist and go through those experiences and deal with that kind of stuff. And then everything else is easy. It's like, everyone I know who you open in New York, and then you're like, everywhere else is so easy compared to this. I would rather do that 100 times over than work my way up to it. I've never really thought that way career-wise. I've always sort of thought, like, kind of throw yourself into the fire, and like either you're going to succeed or you're going to fail. And that's kind of what I love about New York, is it's very like, you can't just glide by.
No way.
You're either killing it or you fail, and then you can go somewhere else.
I mean, there's this fearlessness in you. You see it in the film, like, and you do so much press before opening New York. You do TED Talks, and you go around the world talking about what you represent, and you're so calm. And now then you move to New York, and you open in New York, in the toughest city. I mean, and is this like whole calmness? Is it just how you are, or do you have this internal struggle all the time?
I mean, I'm not going to say I'm entirely calm, but I think the great thing about working in restaurants is it really prepares you how to deal with stress and how to deal with pressure and all these things, because the amount of stress and pressure that is on you on a daily basis, as far as like everything getting done on time, like this sort of, I mean, just restaurants are so stressful, and I mean, I've been doing that for so long now that it's sort of prepared me for like, everything's easy. Like it's like the thing of like, yeah, like you all talking interviews, all this kind of stuff could inherently be daunting, but it's like I have so many other things to worry about that it's like there's no world where that is like a stressful thing.
It doesn't catch up to you. I mean, in the film, there are several scenes of you just hunched over a laptop looking at lists.
Yeah.
And that's like a theme all the time.
Yeah.
And it's just like so you're just saying, like, just to be clear, like in the restaurant world, and especially having achieved such experience at such a young age, it really gets you ready for life.
Yeah. I mean, that was how I, like, my most formative years were spent in environments that were that kind of stressful and in places that were filled with pressure and all this kind of stuff. And that just prepared me for kind of the reality of it. I mean, definitely the opening a restaurant is a kind of different kind of set of skills and different pressures to have than just like being ready for service. But it's not so much that it taught me like how to just like about stress. It taught me how to deal with and process it and deal with it.
People and all that. Yeah.
And people and kind of, I definitely don't think that if I didn't work in kitchens so much at the same time as this, I would have been able to deal with it in such a kind of level-headed way. But I mean, the thing was like I was always focused on the food and dinners and the restaurants I was working in, that while everything kind of was going on, that would sort of fall in the back because like I could be doing an interview, but I'm more stressed out like if the fish is going to be there on that day. And that's always sort of been the focus. And so it kind of helps kind of put everything in perspective.
Speaking of reality, I mean, you clearly were courted by reality shows, and you were coming up in an era when the celebrity chef in reality was actually more viable than now. I think it's kind of actually passed. But you said no to all reality shows, right?
Yeah.
And was that a hard decision? I mean, like back then, like good chefs were on Top Chef. Now I don't really know, but was that tough?
No, I mean, it's tempting, especially like it's tempting when there's a lot of interest and people interested. But I've always been very aware of control and the image that I'm kind of putting out in the world. And the second that I met with someone and knew that these people were controlling the way that I'm presenting myself at such a young age in such an early point in my career, that I didn't want to do that because I knew that if I didn't have the control of how I was putting myself out there, that it could be kind of put in a completely different direction that I didn't want to go in.
Yeah, and then it would be a soundbite and it'd be a cliche, and you're much more thoughtful than that. Let's talk about Jem. I it's your mother is Meg. It's her name spelled backwards. Who came up with that idea?
That was actually my mom's idea.
I love your mom is great in the documentary. I think she's clearly such an inspiration to you, and she was like the manager of your pop-up when you're doing it at your house. And what is her role now in the restaurant?
She doesn't have one, which is I think the healthiest thing for everyone.
Okay.
I mean, once I moved to New York, she kind of stepped out, and she never was in the restaurant industry or wanted to be. She was just doing it to kind of help out.
Helping her son out. And your sister, though, is involved, right? She's a partner of yours?
She's the legal owner because I can't get a liquor license.
Is she like working service, though?
No. She signs things and sort of helps in that way, but on the service aspect, she isn't involved.
And so when I had dinner there, I'm you're young, but I noticed the rest of the staff is also pretty young. I mean, everyone's probably under the age of 30, I would guess. Yeah. What's that like? I mean, that's not typical for New York. I mean, it's not. I mean, it's definitely a variety of ages typically when you walk into a restaurant. And I'm going to say a 2-star New York Times restaurant too. I actually need to say that again, like well-reviewed restaurant.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted it to feel young. Like I could have went out and hired a bunch of per se people who are older and a little bit more boring, but people are coming for a tasting menu that's run by a young person. And because of that, I didn't want even people who had too much like Michelin star experience, because I didn't want people who were so stuck in their ways. We try to do different things in service and try to change, we've had people who came from EMP and it didn't work out because they had this mindset that was instilled in them of how you should work service or how you should do this. And we're like, that's not how we want to do things. So it made sense to have only kind of younger people who are more open to new things. And I mean, it definitely takes a little bit more training and a little bit more sort of being more hands-on on my side. But I think it's all sort of worth it for, I think there's a really truly unique thing that comes from a staff of people who are all very good at what they do, but also very youthful and not burnt out and excited about what they're doing and passionate and kind of like...
Yeah, it was fun. It's an open kitchen. You can see everyone kind of being very focused and intense, and you're very intense, but then there's moments of levity and you're smiling and joking, especially at the end. I did the 9 o'clock seating, so near the end of the day, you're clearly having fun. I mean, but you are the boss, right? I mean, there's moments... When was the last time you had to really be the boss?
I mean, it happens in a very sort of casual way, and I mean... It is the thing where it's sort of like I want people to have fun. I want people to enjoy their jobs, and I want it to be a place where you like everyone you work with and everyone hangs out. But there's a certain point at which like I have to reel people in every once in a while and try to do it in a very sort of respectful way. And I think it is this thing where it's like we can all enjoy ourselves because there is this overarching feeling where everyone knows that like what I say goes, and in the end of the day, it's my decision. It's my restaurant, and we can have as much fun as we want as long as that continues to happen and as long as people continue to listen to that. And the second that doesn't happen, then we don't have to have fun. And there's a lot of places that I've worked, and the places that I really liked were not places that were completely serious all the time, but places that were serious when they needed to be serious. And when everything was going well and like if all the food's being done perfectly, if the service is being done well and everything's getting done on time, there's no reason to not talk to each other, to not enjoy yourselves or play music. Like that only makes you miserable.
It feels like Noma is probably an example of that, where there's moments of intensity, and then of course Renee leads this kind of Mad Hat kind of style.
Yeah, I mean that was really like when I went to go work in Scandinavia. I worked at this place Mimo in Norway, and that to me was the closest version of a place, now a 3 Michelin star restaurant, where when I was there it was a group of people who we all got everything done perfectly so we could have fun.
Yeah.
So we could enjoy ourselves, so we could talk all day, so we could hang out. But that can only happen if we were doing everything exactly how it should be. And if we weren't, there were days where things didn't get done and it wasn't a fun day. And but it also motivated you because it was sort of like having fun and enjoying your job.
That's fine dining. You find people of like mind in that world.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
But it was this thing where it's just like if everyone's doing their job well, we can have fun, and if they're not, then we're not going to have fun. And like that's the job. And like it's to me, I've loved that mindset of just like it sounds weird, but kind of thinking of having fun is like a privilege of like being able to enjoy your job sort of is a privilege. You could go work places that are pretty miserable. Mm-hmm. And if you just do everything right and like do everything exactly how it's meant to be, we can have a great time and you can have all the freedom you want, the kind of creativity. But that can only happen if everything is done exactly how I want it.
What was it like at Geranium working there? Less fun?
No, I mean, it was similar. It was ran in a completely different way.
Yeah.
Mimo was 4 chef de parties and like 8 stages. Geranium was 20 chef de parties.
It overlooks the soccer stadium,
yeah,
right? It's a crazy place.
I mean, it was a very interesting way that it was run because it was very like everyone was in charge of their own thing, and a very similar thing wherever it was fun. Like it was a great group of people, and we would have fun in the daytime, but a very sort of different way of running a restaurant. I mean, Mimo was this sort of small, like still rough around the edges in ways. Like our dry storage was 5 flights below the kitchen only with stairs. And so there was this sort of like roughness to it. And I really like there, I was also at Mimo significantly longer. So I became a lot closer with everyone there. But Geranium to me was, I mean, it was such a different style of cooking that I had. And that's why I went there, because I didn't really want to go from Mimo to like Noma, which are very similar to me food wise. I wanted to go.
Yeah, Geranium is a little bit. It's stiffer.
But it's more technique driven. It's more sort of classic. And I learned a ton there about like how to make everything look perfect and the kind of techniques that go into it, which I found very fascinating. But in the end, kind of was more drawn to places that were more sort of cooking
yeah.
I don't think I cooked anything once at Geranium. It was a lot of molding and cutting and shaping. And at Mimo, it was like, they were like, you're cooking. Like I was like making things and purees, and like there was this sort of like really like flavor first. And But I mean, I really loved seeing the kind of contrast of the two.
Cool. Those are great experiences. I want to talk about Gem and also your interest in beets. I know you did a Beet Wellington in the documentary early on as one of your, like, when you're 13, you're doing Beet Wellington, which is a fun play, and I think has been probably copied many times. And then you're doing a 30-day aged beet in beeswax at Gem. Why are you so obsessed with beets? I kind of love this idea.
Well, it's a very funny time for you to ask this because we literally took them off the menu last week.
Oh, the aged beets?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it was this thing where, I mean, I've been doing beets on every single menu I've had for about maybe 4 years. Mm-hmm. And I think I'm over.
Yeah, dude.
Well, I mean, it's a thing where
it.
It's not that I'm over it. It's that I mean, I really loved seeing the progression of it and seeing how, like, working with one ingredient throughout seasons and throughout times and changing it and really kind of treating it. Like, I love that. I love taking an ingredient and seeing how far you can stretch it. But sort of, I feel like kind of at the end, we are trying to change it. And it was this thing where I was like, I was always sort of the beet dish, whatever. It would come, it would kind of just like happen. Like these ideas would just sort of randomly happen. And sort of towards the end felt like we were trying to force it in the menu.
That's when you know it's time to
and that's when we got rid of it. And I think that's sort of the healthy thing with any quote-unquote signature dish is the second that it feels forced into the menu because people want it or people are coming back for it is the second you shouldn't do it anymore.
I like the way that your menu at Gem progresses with a lot of seafood and vegetables, and you really aren't going crazy with proteins. Is this intentional?
Yeah, I mean, it comes from a lot of reasons. I mean, the biggest one being I don't find meat interesting.
Well, you told me after service, I was setting up for this, that, you know, when you eat beef and chicken and lamb and shellfish and pork in like a tasting, that's like, when you think about it, that's fucking gross.
Well, I mean, so those are the two, is like the first reason is like, I find it very sort of like when you do serve meat, serve it as simply as possible because it's delicious. Inherently, meat is delicious. I every once in a while crave a steak. But also on the flip side of that, the amount of meals I've had where I have a foie course, a chicken course, a lamb course, a beef course, a duck course, you feel absolutely disgusting because no one is meant to mix that many proteins together. And it makes so much sense in your head of like, why would you do this to your body? Mm-hmm. And I think a big thing that we try to focus on that is something I don't think a lot of tasting menu restaurants focus on is not just the flavor or the progression of the meal, but how you feel after you eat the meal. Because the amount of meals I've had ruined by how I felt after them because it's too much food or the food's too heavy and like, yeah, everything was delicious and incredible, but you reach this point where you sort of start to hate it because you're so grossly full that you're kind of like resenting the next course before it even comes.
Yeah, it's a shame that that's what we've kind of gone towards with tasting menus. But I do think that there's kind of a pushback and like auto mix is a good example where you feel great afterwards, even though it's a lot of food.
I haven't been yet, but I want to go.
What do you do for fun? Like, I mean, outside of your owning a business and running a restaurant, like what do you do for fun?
I mean, currently have very little time to exist outside of the restaurant. I mean, I really, and it sounds like we have fun at the restaurant. Like it's a really fun group of people, and I think we really try to show that is that like I am friends with everyone I work with, and we have really fun together. And it's a lot of like everyone has this feeling of like we don't have time off, so we might as well have fun at work. I mean, also like I get sort of one day off a week, and I always make sure to go get dinner with a friend. I mean, that's something that when I first moved to New York, I loved so much. It's just like the act of going to a restaurant and having like a 3-hour dinner. And unfortunately, I can't do that because I'm providing that for people. Mm-hmm. So I always make sure sort of like I have Sunday nights off, and I always on a Sunday night will go just have like a nice long dinner with.
Where have you gone recently in New York? Or are some of your spots for these Sunday night dinners out?
I go to Four Horsemen a lot in Brooklyn. I really just love that restaurant so much. It's just like a really chill place with incredible food. Frenchette recently. I mean, I sort of hit this, like I live right by the restaurant, so I go to Servos a lot down there. I wish Wild Air was open on Sundays. Yeah, I mean, like Estella, I sort of hit the same spots.
Yeah, these are all spots that I feel like are similar in style and have like really proficient and great execution, but have like a really fun vibe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Something that I want to go somewhere that's a little bit more boisterous and a little bit like fun, and also get like delicious food. But a place, I mean, I'm going to kind of like I'm not trying to go to a tasting menu on my day off. I want to go somewhere that's fun, that is like has a great energy in the room, and because that's what I love about New York restaurants.
But also has incredible food and interesting food. Who do you call when you're like in a pinch? Like, do you have a mentor? Do you have like a role model in the food world, in the chef world, who helps you out?
I mean, I have a lot of really great friends who I call like. I mean, closest to mentor probably like I talk to Ari from Alma a lot about. I realize more and more how similar our restaurant is to Alma in ways of, I mean, as it's
Alma was
like when Alma first opened and was a small sort of thing, like with not a ton of backers and trying to do something a little bit different, and the problems that I saw arising at that restaurant are the same ones we're dealing with. So sort of talking to someone who's been through that, is why I talk to him a lot. The guys from Contra and Wild, they're really good friends of mine, and very similar thing of like have a small restaurant kind of similar to ours and are very young in the industry. And I talk to people like that a lot because I feel like they have the closest experience to what we're dealing with at the restaurant on a day-to-day basis, opposed to talking to someone who opened a $3 million restaurant and all these kind of things that they have such a different outlook on all these problems and stuff that goes in.
Yeah, they're running downtown restaurants. They've got similar problems.
Exactly.
Similar space issues, purveyor issues. Those are great guys to talk to. We always ask this for our guests. If you were to have a cookbook out in the world, spend a couple of years writing it, researching it, etc., what would it be? What is a topic that you wish to write about?
I mean, I've always thought if I do a cookbook, which will probably happen one day, I don't want to write a cookbook because, like, to me, reading all the Noma books, whatever else, no one's gonna make that stuff. Like, it's inherently just like you're not going to. What I do find interesting in all those books is the way that they talk about things, the way that the chefs think about things. And so if I were to do something, I'd want to make something that's a lot more sort of kind of visual focused, and because that to me is such a big part of what we do. But also talking more about sort of the way that we think about things, the way that we at the restaurant think about ingredients and think about cooking and why we do it. Not just like showing you this is how we do all this stuff, saying sort of like why we make things this way. Because I think that can be translated into a home a lot easier than a book for Relay or something, which I love that book so much. Like, and I like that one to me was really interesting, but something that's sort of talking about like why chefs in restaurants like this think about ingredients this way and kind of how you can translate that in your day-to-day
It's a noble cause. It's a tricky execution because you start talking about topics and it goes over the head of most readers.
Yeah.
So it would be a challenge, but I hope you can do that.
That's why I'm putting that off for a while.
Yeah. I know. I'm with it. Flynn McGarry, thanks for joining the Taste Podcast.
Thanks for having me on.
Here's Matt with New York City restaurant publicist Stephen Hall.
Stephen Hall, founder of Hall Company, Hall PR. Thank you for joining the Taste Podcast.
Oh, my God, Matt. Thank you so much for having me. It is a pleasure to be here. Sit opposite the table from you. It's awesome.
I've wanted to have you on for a long time. You're one of my buddies in the industry. I've worked with you for years. You've seen a lot, and I really wanted to get some stories. But first, I just wanted to get into your job. I think publicists and PR and in the restaurant world are kind of misunderstood a little bit. We can talk about the changing landscape of media. Sure. We'll get into that. But also, I just want to like get into like the nuts and bolts of what you do, because of course you're trying to generate media for your clients, but you're also helping the chef and the restaurateur develop a menu. You're also helping them staff. You're also helping them. You're helping them market. It's not just about getting in the New York Times.
No, it's not. I mean, we do a tremendous amount of work for our clients from the time that we're hired until, however long our contract lasts, and even then some. I always tell everybody that I wind up doing a lot of work for free way after I've stopped working with a particular client because of the just general nature of the time frame of journalism. And, we don't say no to a journalist when they call and they're looking for information, whether we're working for the restaurant or not, unless, of course, I've had to take them to small claims court or something like that to try and get
We can
paid.
talk about paying
bills. But that's another story. But yeah, no, that's part of the fun part of the job is creating the brand that we're then going to go out with. Because restaurants are sometimes they're just like blobs of clay, kind of, and they need to be molded. And the chef has one vision, maybe the owner has another vision, and the mixologist has a different vision, and the sommelier, and then there's the pastry chef, and we kind of all have to, sort of corral them all together so that we have one cohesive story to tell. And a lot of times we orchestrate some things going on behind the scenes when an owner's not happy with a chef. If I know somebody else that's out of work or that maybe is not happy in the job that they're in, I will orchestrate them to sort of come in. We'll do the same thing with mixologists and sommeliers. And it's kind of like it elongates our position with our clients because it makes us so valuable to them that by the time the contract ends, they don't really realize it's ended because what are they going to do without us?
I think it also what you bring to a new client is you've seen pretty much every mistake made, right?
Pretty much, pretty much. I always tell that everybody that I'm your eyes and ears because you're in your restaurant 7 days a week, how many hours? 18 hours a day probably, but I'm in 5 restaurants a day or 4 or 7 days a week. I'm going out constantly and seeing what else is out there. And then I said, think of me as like a carrier pigeon. I come back with some news and I plop it on your doorstep and I say, these are the things that we should be doing because this is what's happening in the industry.
I think I wanted to shift it away from like earned media, which is like the press that you receive in like magazines and on websites, because I haven't really covered the restaurant world in like 6 years, like the openings and all that. I used to cover it quite extensively, but I wanted to know like how has it changed? I've noticed obviously earned media is important, but there's social media and there's influencer media. How are influencers getting people into restaurants? Are you going after influencers?
We don't necessarily have to go after influencers because influencers come to us because they are always touting their platform and they want to go to a hot restaurant or a place where there's a celebrity chef because they know that people are following that and they're hoping that in return it'll be followed for them. That is a very interesting question because clearly I earn my living mostly on earned media because ultimately I'm a storyteller and I love telling stories and I think that journalists tell stories great. And obviously, Instagram and other platforms are trying to find different ways to tell stories through picture or through video. And I think that that's a fantastic medium for restaurants because you really get to see it. But my problem with the influencer market is that they don't always respect the product that they're going in to eat. And
understand.
First of all, an influencer once said to me, "Oh, Scott, I haven't had a hot meal in 5 years." And I'm just like, well, if you put down can I say the word? If you put down the fucking camera and, eat the food, maybe the chef will be a lot happier of having you in the restaurant. But I get the drive, and the desire to sort of like get the shot or get the picture or get the like and get the follower. But I want the butt in the seat. So I vet all the people that approach us very, very carefully. And I am very, as you know, I don't mince words. And, clearly I've said to some people, from your feet, it doesn't look like you've eaten in a week. So
what are you going to do with my steakhouse client? Right?
Who cares? Who that follows you cares about, about food.
Yeah, I think social media, it's been fun to participate in food social media. I mean, I think the medium is really exciting, but when I want to go somewhere new, I'm not really looking at the feeds. I'm looking at the critics. I'm looking at the journalists. And I wanted to lead in with that to talk about the New York City critics.
Sure.
Really, I think we're at a cool time. We have had some critics who've been around for a little while. We have some newer critics. Let's just go down the list a little bit And like, give me your thoughts on some of the critics. And I really, you do not mince words. So like, give us your honest. So let's start with.
But going back to the influence, I have to say I have seen some people bring people in. I really have. I've seen, and those are the people that really work at it, you know. So I have seen it work, but I think it has to be very, very focused.
Okay.
And it can't be like one day I post about furniture and the next day I post about food and the next day I post about Italian food, then Japanese food. I mean, I think that part of it needs to be very focused. But I have seen people work. But yes, I love critics. I really do. I love reading their reviews.
Let's talk about Pete Wells. Let's start from the top.
All right.
I think he's probably the most influential critic in America. He's a New York Times critic. He's been around for maybe 7-8 years.
I guess, yeah.
Yeah, what do you think about Pete Wells?
I like Pete Wells. I mean, I have had many dealings with him even before he was the New York Times
He was over at the
critic. He
editor.
Was at Food and Wine, and he was at Details, and I've always thought he was just a lovely guy and someone who was really fun to be around and had a real passion for the words. You know, the one thing that I love about restaurant critics, and a couple of the ones that I think that we're going to talk about, they really make you taste the food with the words, you know, and that is to me just the sign of a great writer. And I just think he really makes you taste the food. You know, he's got this great way with prose that it's funny and it's like ooh and
Wells is,
and
we're
ooh,
fans of Wells on the Taste
you know?
podcast.
Yeah.
He knows his Korean food too. I love that about
He
him.
does know his Korean food. Well, he's been around food for a really long time, so you know he knows what he's talking about. And I think he's smart enough to know when he doesn't, and that you know with the other people that he dines out with probably and things. So I think he's a very I think he's a terrific guy.
Now, when we go through these names, I don't expect you obviously to say negative things about these guys because why should we? This is a friendly place. Let's talk about Hannah Goldfield at the New Yorker.
Yeah.
Newer name, slightly newer name. What do you think about her? What's she?
You know, I first met her when she was at the New York Times in the magazine section, and I thought she was a lovely person. And I think, and every once in a while, a publication surprises me when they're not really about food. My wonderful, wonderful friend, you know, David Boulay would always say things like, "But does it make them hungry, Stephen? Does it make them hungry?" And I always thought, does the New Yorker make anyone hungry? But slowly but surely, because and maybe it's because of social media or because of people being able to find the reviews, I've seen the New Yorker actually bring business in and good business, good business.
Getting
like
that
knowledgeable
print spot, like
yeah.
Hannah's review every week, I think they've really made that a must read.
And I also think that she's actually really looking at it as a critic, whereas before it was just a sort of a report on the restaurant, and there wasn't like, did they like it? Did they not like it? There wasn't really any of that. But because she's a food person, she's expressing her opinion, and I think it's great. I think it's opening up a whole new boundary for them.
I'm going to go in a little bit on Adam Platt. I've never really been a fan of his. I think he's smart and he's obviously had some meals. He often writes about the spaces more than the food, and I think his narratives can be a little shaky at times. It's unfortunate because New York Mag is like the pinnacle of journalism and they have an amazing food section. But I'm not going to really say much more. But what do you think about Adam Platt?
I feel bad in some ways because I remember, of course, when New York Magazine was a weekly publication, and now it's a bi-weekly publication. And when you do the math, it's only 26 issues a year, if even that. And there's be 26 restaurants opening up between now and Tuesday. So it's like I think he's in a very hard position. I think he goes to a lot of places that he can't review because he just doesn't have the space. And I think he winds up reviewing the big guns because that's what maybe the New York Magazine reader wants to read about. But I think that he veers off a little bit and finds some, cheap eats places. And I think Robin and Rob do a great job with that. Oh my God, they do a great job. And they have remained secretive, which I think is amazing in this day and age that they have truly remained secretive. So I enjoy his reviews. I like the scratch pad that he does because I think that it's nice to break it down as to how he arrived at his ultimate rating, so to speak.
Yeah, it's a really well-edited section.
Yeah,
and the
very,
scratch
very
pad
much
is a
so.
really nice thing.
Yeah, and the end of the year issue is like we used to say people would rip it out and keep it on their refrigerator. I don't know if people rip out magazine pages anymore.
I think they do.
But,
I do.
And keep it on their refrigerator. Yeah. So, obviously being in that year-end issue is something to strive for because that's where he can talk about places that maybe he hasn't had the opportunity to review. So I think that that he does a pretty good job of sort of running around the city.
And I think my favorite critic, and Ruth Reuschel, we had her on the podcast a few episodes ago, and she echoed this, is Lagaya Michan at the New York Times.
When she writes an editorial story that have been popping up lately in T Magazine, they are always spot on. She's I have to agree, she's a great writer. And I think that her reviews, the places that I think that a lot of the places she chooses to go and that she chooses to review are places that the average person probably might never go to. But knowing that they're there is really interesting. And I think that it's interesting. And she doesn't care. It's kind of like, I think she'd review a great hot dog stand if she could.
Yeah. She's really like blind to any kind of like geography or any style. She really covers the world of food in New York City.
I think that you mentioned Ruth Reuschel before, and I think that a lot of her writing changed the way that people reviewed restaurants. And I remember, because I've been in this for quite some time, I remember when she reviewed a restaurant. I don't remember what the restaurant is, but her whole narrative was about following an Asian woman like from Saks Fifth Avenue down the street with shopping bags, saying, where was this woman going? She was very fashionable and very stylish, and she wound up in this Japanese restaurant probably somewhere in the East 40s that most Caucasian people probably haven't gone to, but Ruth followed her in and sat down and reviewed the restaurant. And I just thought, this is like a video, this is like a play.
Beautiful prose, amazing. Both of them are amazing.
I'm tingling just thinking.
You mentioned Bouley, David Bouley, and I there's a million. We could have a whole podcast about David Bouley.
We should have him on.
Hopefully, I think I would probably have one question, and then he would talk for like 60 minutes. Anyone who's interviewed David Bouley, I've had the pleasure of interviewing him several times. He really likes to talk.
Yeah, he does.
But he's been a longtime client. It's been quite a journey. He's shuttering Brushstroke. I just read that yesterday.
Yeah.
What's going on there?
Well, the truth is that I haven't been involved in his restaurant since Bouley at Home opened. He's been starting to do a lot more of his traveling. Like the intention when he closed the Bouley on Hudson and Duane, the whole idea was that he was then going to, travel the world and come back and forth and learn more about health and food and how it related to people's health. So he's really started on that journey, which I think is fantastic and something that he's always wanted. And, Brushstroke was open 7 years, and it's an economic decision, I'm assuming. He has not been a part of Brushstroke for a while. He kind of, when he is, and I really have, again, I haven't been involved in it for a long time, but I just found out, like everybody else, that he hadn't been involved in it in quite some time. Yeah. But Brushstroke was a great restaurant. It was a sort of almost a turning point for me in our career as publicists, because this is the second time that I worked with Bouley, because I worked with him once before. And then we came back on because I got so involved in Japan, which I think we'll talk about a little later, but I got so involved in Japan and what was going on there in the food scene that when he opened up Brushstroke and someone said to me, Bouley's looking for a publicist for Brushstroke, I called him up. I'm like, And then I worked with him for, I guess, 6-7 years.
Oh, wow. Yeah, you did a lot of great work late in his career. But I think let's go back to David Bouley's earlier years when he was named People Magazine's sexiest man alive. He was in that issue, wasn't maybe the man alive, but he was in that issue. And he was kind of America's first celebrity chef, you could say, in many ways. What was it like working with him early on in his career?
Well, I didn't work with him back then. Yeah. I only worked at like the third Bouley and then then this Bouley. But I've known him for a very long time because I was in the business. I was a server in 1987. 1985, I started my career in restaurants and worked as a server. And you knew who David Bouley was if you were going to be part of the restaurant world. And everybody talked about the white chocolate mice that you got at the end of the meal at the original Bouley and the hours that you spent there and all of these things. And I got to tell you, like when he called me and I went for my first meeting with him, I was really surprised that he even was ever going to hire anybody at all. And when he did hire me, he said, "Do you know why I hired you?" And I said, no, tell you the truth, I didn't think you were going to hire anyone at all. And he said, well, you were the only one who didn't blow smoke up my ass. And I said, well, I just wanted to meet you because I hadn't met him. And this was easily 10, 12 years ago, whatever. And he is the smartest man in show business. He is someone who dances to the beat of his own drum and lives his life. He is the most independent person that I have ever worked with or that I know. And every day he made food taste better. Every day. And he taught me so much about food and health. And I would leave there saying, I want to buy that water machine too, you know? So he's a friend now, obviously, and I am enamored with him.
Do you remain friends with a lot of your clients?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I feel like you have a great relationship with a lot. I mean, you have had a lot of cool clients. I've covered many of them. So let's go down some of your favorites. Let's talk about Piche Ang.
Ah, yeah, sure.
What do you
talk to Piche all the time?
Yeah, like Piche Ang, like what brings to mind when we talk about Piche? I know he hasn't really been in New York in the past few years.
No, he moved to Bethesda and he's working with Eric on these different Washington. Exactly. Yeah. And he's having a great time. He's traveling the world. He's been doing a tremendous amount of traveling. He he explores food deeply. He travels a lot with his mom and his dad. So he's a good man, you know.
Who are some of your other favorite clients looking back over the years?
Katie Sparks.
Yeah.
For sure. She and I have had a long friendship since the day that we met. We became friends instantly, and she is the one person who I think I could eat her food every single day, and she has the courage of her convictions, and she's a wonderful person, and she's a friend, and and by far she definitely grew, helped me nurture my palate as I grew in this industry. I love Anita Lowe. I spent a lot of time with her. We represented her at Moreji, which was the first Korean sort of French hybrid restaurant that she was the chef of. So she was great. Doug Rodriguez, we had an amazing time with him when we opened up Chakama. He still says, Stephen, I don't care what restaurant it is, open up that drawer of press that we got for Chakama. I guarantee you that it's more placements than anyone ever got. It really was.
Yeah, when restaurants take over New York, it's like wildfire. It becomes this, and I think a lot of your more recent clients, let's talk about some of the Japanese and Chinese, I would call them imports, like Dadang and Inakari Steak. I mean, these are two restaurants that you represented, and Inakari Steak, holy shit, that is some press for that place. It is an amazing place. But
It is. And it's growing tremendously. Now we're up to 9 locations. And when we started, it was the standing steakhouse, but now people get to sit because people are lazy. They're even getting a little lazier in Japan because they're sitting there too. And it was just bringing back a casual way of eating steak that people hadn't done before, but it had the Japanese aesthetic to it. So the sauce that you poured on it was the soy-based steak sauce and wasabi.
So delicious.
Oh my God, unbelievable. Really, really delicious. And it's been great. Like I said, I started working with Japanese restaurants probably about 10 years ago. I went to Japan, and it was kind of a magical moment for me. I was like, wow, and I fell in love with it, and I met a lot of people there, and a lot of chefs were very enamored with it, and I kind of again, right place, right time, it kind of exploded. And about 5 years ago, there was an influx of Japanese brands that started to open up in the U.S., especially in New York, and our first one in that way was Tempura Matsui, which is one of my pride and joys. I just, was so blessed to be part of that restaurant and to work with Matsui-san before he passed away.
I know, it's such a sad
it
story
was
that
very
he passed
sad.
Away.
Yeah.
It was like a omakase for tempura. And something that we've never really seen. It's still there.
Yeah.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, it's still there. But something, that New York had never really seen before, and it was a real passion project. And then that led into Otoya. Otoya, U.S. owned Tempura Matsui, so we did work with them, and that is a great casual home-style Japanese restaurant, which was really wonderful, and that's been great. And then that led into Sushi Ginza Onodera, which obviously has 2 Michelin stars now, and and sort of like the pinnacle of sushi restaurants. And then that led into, EAK Ramen and Ichiran. And now, we're doing some work for Apudo. I'm on the board of the Gohan Society, which is brilliant. And we're doing a great gala on October 10th at the Meredith Building downtown, gohansociety.org. Go buy tickets.
Can you get into Ichiran in Williamsburg? I've not tried to go because I've waited in line in Tokyo, and that's cool, but I don't really want to wait in line in Williamsburg.
I met a person who was going to potentially do a ramen restaurant here, and now we're flooded with ramen restaurants, as you know. I don't have to tell you that there's almost one on every corner. And I said, all you've got to do to get a lot of press and attention is bring with you a vending machine.
Man, it markets itself for sure.
Exactly. Yeah. Bring it. Whatever it costs you to have it made in Japan and ship over, you will get back.
Let's talk about in general, though, really what makes a hot restaurant in New York in 2018? I feel like there's probably a playbook. I know you probably won't spill all the secrets, but what really compels this kind of fusion of press and social media and word of mouth and great Yelp reviews? They all come together. Inakari Steak is a great example.
Yeah, we're having it now. We're seeing that moment. We just opened a Da Indian Canteen with Rani Mazumdar and Chintan Pandya, who own Rahi down in the West Village. And obviously over the last couple of years, there's been a little bit of a wave of modern Indian food hitting the city, which I think is great because Indian food has been one of those cuisines that some people just can't grasp onto. But now that chefs like Chintan are making it accessible to people and giving it a different level of flavor, and it's happening in a few different restaurants as well. There's Pondicherry, and obviously Babuji had
So these flavors, these South Asian flavors you're feeling are really becoming
I think they're very popular. And now we have a Da which opened up on a baseless Thompson Avenue in Long Island City, right across the street from LaGuardia Community College. And we just got a beautiful piece on Grub Street from a journalist who said that this may very well be the best Indian restaurant to open in New York. So I think that what has to happen is that first you need the story and you need the focus on what it is that you're doing. Then you need the person to fall in love. You need to find the person who's going to fall in love with it. And then that person is going to do all the work for you.
So you really have to execute on your promise. Once they sit down and have that meal, they fall in love and they evangelize.
Right.
What about this idea of being first, being cool and having that first post or that first social media plug?
You mean from the side of the
or just
journalist?
anyone in general. I feel like that kind of drives a restaurant when you have look at Hanoi House and on the East Village, great place. But I feel like there was a moment where every food journalist in New York was there doing their gram, and that's made that place really big.
Right, and then we have this magical phrase. It's called follow up. And a lot of people think of us as very momentary, unfortunately, and we try to sell our services for as long of a period of time as possible. A lot of people don't realize what's in the follow-up, and they may stay hot or busy for a year or 18 months or 2 years, but eventually at that time, they're going to call me or somebody like me, and they're going to say, okay, we need to get back into the swing of the press. We need to get back into the swing of things because we've kind of lost our mojo. And that's what I think that some people are very short-sighted about when it comes to PR, that they only think of it as an opening. And they don't think of it as a long journey. And it's a really good publicist who can take that story and keep that story going and make that thread longer and longer and longer. And you need the help of your client, of course. They have to be willing to play along, but that's what happens a lot. And I think that the initial hotness is great, but we know what happens. Buyers die down.
There's a new hotness. I think it's changed, and this nuanced approach to PR is really fascinating to me because I think when I was starting to cover restaurants in the early 2000s, it was all about the hot opening and it was all about the hot party.
Yeah.
And I remember there used to be so many cool restaurant parties and they were legitimately cool. I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm just not getting invited to them, but are there what happened to the cool restaurant opening party?
Fallen off those lists.
I guess I've fallen off the list, but are they happening anymore? I feel like it's changed dramatically.
Well, it just happened at the Playboy Club, right? They just had a hot opening. So when and when a place is like that, then it needs that party. It needs that excitement restaurant. We're going to be doing one very soon at our restaurant Zao, which is the fishing restaurant from Japan, where diners catch their own fish. And that's going to be a party that people are going to want to go to.
Such a sensation in Tokyo, by the way.
Yes, it's unbelievable. Yeah. And that's going to be a media dinner, so to speak, because we can't really do past hors d'oeuvres that way. But that's the party that people want to go to. When I reopened Tavern on the Green, which was probably about 5 years ago, people came up to me during the party. They said, parties like this are why I live in New York City. And to me, that was the sign of a successful party. But back in the day, we all used to go to each other's parties. You know, the industry has become a little segregated in some ways. And
fragmented,
and very fragmented. And we don't all get invited to each other's events. And I kind of think that's a shame because
I miss that.
We're all in the same business. Why shouldn't we all support a new restaurant that's opening? I'm not trying to steal somebody else's client, and I hope that somebody's not trying to steal mine. But who talks better than us?
Did you work at Tavern on the Green with Jeremiah Tower?
Yes.
You crossed. Oh, my God.
Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
Wait, how, was the documentary accurate?
I didn't even see it.
Just like war scars.
The funny thing is that when I worked at Arizona 206, which is where I was a waiter in 1987 to 1990, the original chef, Brendan Walsh, had worked at Stars. And he obviously had talked a lot about Jeremiah Tower. So I knew of Jeremiah Tower. And when the owner of Tavern called me and said, Jeremiah Tower wants to be the chef of Tavern on the Green, I said, are you fucking kidding me?
It was surprising.
That's amazing. That's the most unbelievable thing I've ever heard. I don't even know what to say. And then I sat with him and I said, why do you want the job? Why do you want to do this? And of course I said, I respect and tremendous admiration, blah, blah, blah. And he said, I'm bored.
In Mexico, he was living
he said, I'm bored. And I can't think of a better way to get my, platform back than to do it here.
Spoiler alert. What happened?
After that, I always say the same thing, that after that, the only word that Jeremiah Tower ever said to me was no. I would say, hey, Jeremiah, so-and-so wants to do it. No. Hey, Jeremiah, no. I was like, what happened to I'm getting my platform back? So It was not what I would call the easiest relationship to navigate.
Yeah, the documentary really gets into it. There's probably a lot more questions that come from it than answers. I highly recommend watching it. But
they didn't let me be interviewed for it. It was very funny because the producer said to me, "You're the publicist. We really need for you to be interviewed." And then they never.
Wow, that's surprising.
They never came back to me.
Because 0.0, they're pretty open.
I was like, where's my contract now?
Yeah, I don't know. It's good. But let's talk about Arizona 206 because it seems for fans of American Psycho, the restaurant Dorsia, which is fictionalized in that restaurant, in that book and in that movie, is like the
musical.
And musical that bombed, absolutely bombed. Let's talk about what it was like to work at the hottest restaurant in New York in the late 80s.
It was great. My favorite Arizona 206 story is, and it's not my favorite story, but it's a good story, is as a server, I poisoned Mike Nichols. And, I was one of those servers that never wrote anything down because I kind of felt like I would remember, Matt's wearing a rust shirt and he's having the venison black bean chili and the guy in the blue shirt's having the chili relleno. So, and then we used to have these things called PLUs. You had a number that was attached to every item. And I'll never forget, it was the night that we got the 3-star review from Brian Miller, was the restaurant critic. And Mike Nichols and Diane Sawyer came to the restaurant for dinner. And I now know that Mike Nichols he's passed away now, rest in peace, was deathly allergic to shellfish. So he ordered barbecue foie gras, which had a number very close to the cornmeal crusted oysters. So I, sleepwalking through, ordered him cornmeal crusted oysters.
And cornmeal crusted oysters do not look like oysters.
That's my or foie gras. So this was my defense was that, well, they came in little oyster shells. Did you not realize that maybe they'd gotten the wrong dish? And I'll never forget, they ordered a bottle of Opus One. Opus One,
gosh.
big wine, big wine.
Of the era, wow.
And then when we found out that, and he literally said, "These are delicious. What are they?" I said, "Well, those are your cornmeal crusted oysters." And he was like, he went pale. And I said, "Oh my God, there's going to be an expose on me on 2020 or something." Diane Sawyer, my career, whatever career I have, is now over completely. He went down to the bathroom. Oh my God, it was a disaster.
Got rid of it.
It was, but that was a sign of Arizona 206. And I mean, it was obviously a tremendous amount of celebrities, but there were 3 restaurants on that block that were kind of aligned together: Yellow Fingers, Contrapunto, Arizona 206, Arizona Cafe. And it was the first Southwestern restaurant in New York City, and it brought a new flavor to people's dining. And it was a 50-seat restaurant, took no reservations.
Wow, so no reservations for that one.
At the very beginning. Then eventually it went into reservations. And it was, it was the what they used to say called dry dock country, because there was a savings bank at that time called Dry Dock. And they used to call the Upper East Side Dry Dock country. And Cinema 1, 2, and 3 were like the hot movie theaters,
Yeah.
It was a great moment. It was the Bloomingdale's era, Studio 54 days.
Oh, man.
It was awesome.
Like, were you working long shifts and then just going out after it?
Pretty much.
Just a big party?
Big parties. I mean, we worked long shifts, but they weren't. It was the Upper East Side, and there wasn't really a Balthazar. There wasn't that downtown scene going on in the restaurant world at that time. So that was really the spot. And then, so we would get out probably by 11 or 12. It was never really a late thing. And then, we were waiters. So we went out and took the money that was in our pocket and spent it
on the guy,
spent it on illicit activities, and then went back to work the next day.
Do you have a favorite era of the New York restaurant scene over the past couple decades?
That's an interesting question. I like. Do I have a favorite era? I think that I kind of liked the beginning of when we first started our business, which was 1996. I think I liked it then because there wasn't as much competition. I used to say at that time, when Williamsburg started to become a hot restaurant scene, I used to say, when I started my business, the only reason why you went to Williamsburg was to go to Peter Luger or buy round matzah. You didn't go there for like a hot restaurant. So you were kind of able to explore and experience and hop more. And, so I like that time, the between like 96 to like the
there
early
was like
2000s.
Real money too in the game, and that leads to my next question. Like in the late 90s, there was like real money, like margins were healthy, and now restaurants are struggling in New York because the margins are razor thin.
Yes, they really are, and about to get thinner.
And because of the real estate is a huge part of it. My last question to close is really, how can restaurants survive in this era in New York City specifically, when landlords are charging astronomical rates, diners are fickle as ever. Diners have always been fickle, but they're as fickle as ever now.
Yeah.
And there's just a lot of choices out there with delivery, Blue Apron.
Sure.
People are cooking more at home. I read those headlines, it's great for taste, not great for restaurants.
Right.
So there's all these, like, this storm is brewing, and it's causing, like, neighborhood restaurants to close every single week.
I know. It's a problem. And I've, one of my longest clients has been the Ollie Cart Restaurant Group. Literally, I've represented them for like 20 years, and it's Carmine's and Virgil's, and Jeffrey Bank, who's the CEO, always talks to me about these kinds of things and about how thin the margins are, and about what they do to kind of not cut costs but give value to people. And I think that, like, Carmine's is such a great formula. It just works so beautifully. And I think that it's very hard, and that's why it's a business that's based on passion. And you have to have a real passion for the hospitality industry. The margins were always lean, always. But if you do it right, you really can succeed. And you have to keep your guests coming back. And this is back to what I said before about keeping the story going, keeping the mystery alive, constantly updating, not to do something outside of your box, but changing the menu or never changing the menu so that people come back all the time. I have a restaurant that's in my building, Novita, where I live, and I go there when I'm not working a lot of the time, and I have one dish, rigatoni with olives and tuna, and it's delicious. And I have that one dish, and I think that there's a lot to be said for that.
That's great. I just want to actually close with one last question. Your 2 or 3 favorite New York City restaurants that are not clients. Just where should we be going?
Well, I go where a lot of my friends cook, what I really like. But and in my neighborhood, I go to Barbunya a lot. I love it. I think Amit Zohra's a great chef, and he does delicious food, and the bread from the taboon is just delicious. I love it. What else do it's so interesting because I'll walk out of here and I'll think about 20 places, but I go, because I spend so much time with my clients, I don't go a lot. I go to the theater a lot, so I sort of park myself at the bar at Marseille, because I think that they do a great job. Obviously, it's the same ownership, and I full disclosure, I worked with them in the past over years, but I've been in this business for 22 years, so it's hard to find a restaurant.
Marseille is like like a good go-to post theater.
So I go, it's great. It's great for theater. I like what is it? Those are the ones that I kind of go to. It's kind of it's interesting. I like Union Square Cafe.
Yeah, the new one's good. Yeah. It's really good. I
like go there. I like their chicken dishes. I'm addicted to the egg sandwiches at Daily Provision. Have you ever had the egg sandwiches at Daily Provision?
It over there yet.
They're perfect. They're perfect. I was kind of addicted to those, but it's kind of like on my path. So I used to like Scott Conan's restaurant, Fausto, that was in the neighborhood. Was it Fausto? No, what was the name?
Fausto's in Brooklyn.
Fusco,
yeah.
That's what that was called. That was in my neighborhood. I used to go there a lot. I go to Ivan's for ramen.
Right on.
Obviously, I love Ivan, and I love Ivan's ramen.
Yeah, man.
I think that it's quite delicious. So I eat a lot of sushi and a lot of tori. I like tori yakitori, so I go to Tori Shin a lot. I like going there.
That's a good post theater one too. I like
that
one. Yeah,
very, very, very good. So so that's what I do.
Steve, it's been such a pleasure talking to you.
Oh my God, it's a pleasure to talk to you as well. It's so much fun to sort of rap about the business. Thank you.
The Taste podcast is hosted by Matt Rodbard and me, Anna Heasel. The show is produced by Gabrielle Lewis, studio recordings by Pat Stango, theme music by Steve Rydell. Interviews are recorded live at Books Are Magic in Cobble Hill, Brooklyn, and at Penguin Random House Studios in Manhattan. Visit Taste online at tastecooking.com. Thanks for listening.